Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thank you so much for being here. Hope you had a great weekend. Welcome back to it. We have a ton to do today. We're not even gonna have time to talk about Lil Nas X's shoes. That's how busy we are. We don't even have time to talk about Satan's shoes. But don't worry, we'll get to that tomorrow. We're gonna talk about the Georgia election bill that everyone's freaking out about. It's the new Jim Crow, and everyone is lying to you about it. I'll just give you a little kicker here. You can indeed drink water while standing in line. Biden is lying to you about it. We'll tell you about that coming up. Also, Professor Rackaniel is going to be, of course, the latest with the COVID vaccines and all that. And I also want to talk about Oakland. Oakland is the biggest city in the country now to have a guaranteed minimum income program. Free money, but only if you have enough melanin in your skin. Don't go thinking that if you're poor and white, you're going to get any free money. Of course not. We'll talk about that coming up in the next segment. I got a twofer in this segment. First, there's one big takeaway from Biden's press conference that I want us to hang on to, that I believe can frame everything moving forward in the Biden-Harris administration. Have you heard that? It's now for the first time ever, it's the president and vice president. They don't call it the Biden administration, it's the Biden-Harris administration. They're getting ready for the transition already. What I'm gonna play for you here says less about Biden, although it says a lot, and more about how the media will cover him until they don't. I'll explain that. Here, this is the one clip you really need to see from the press conference.
I'm gonna say something outrageous. I have never been particularly poor at calculating how to get things done in the United States Senate. So the best way to get something done, if it holds near and dear to you that you like to be able to, anyway, we're going to get a lot done. And if we have to, if there's complete lockdown and chaos as a consequence of the filibuster, then we'll have to go beyond what I'm talking about. Okay, hang on. Sorry. Oh, Ms. Kim.
And what are we doing here? You are not allowed to ask any questions, ever, about the president's mental health. You're not allowed to ask any questions about the president's cognitive abilities or dementia or anything. Right? Remember during the last presidency, how worried we were told all the time that Trump's going to start World War III because he was a strong man? What message did Biden just send right there to China and Russia? It's not the strong man. So here's how this is going to work. This is the important thing. Right now, it's only far-right fringe lunatics like me who are asking any questions about the president's health. Then it's going to be more mainstream conservatives, and when that starts to happen, the media is going to rip these people to shreds. How could you say such a thing? How dare you question the president's health? You're emboldening our enemies by suggesting he's not well and unfit. How could you? How dare you? You're terrible. You're awful. And then people on the far left are going to outflank the president and start asking the same questions. And the media is going to do the best they can to hold this off for as long as they can. And then one day, something will happen, and it will be absolutely undeniable, even more so than that clip we just played. And then the Democrats, the ones who are really running the show, are going to throw old Joe out to pasture so fast he won't even know what happened. His key card to the Oval Office one day just won't work. Right? You ever been fired, or you know someone who's fired and no one tells them? And they're just not allowed back in the building. Like, that'll be Joe. They won't even tell him. He won't be allowed in the Oval Office, and he'll crawl through the window, and Kamala will be sitting at the Resolute's desk, and they will just throw Joe down the memory hole like he never even happened. Does that make sense? So it's gonna be a far-right conspiracy hit job, partisan hit job, and nothing, then boom, gone. Just one day, gone. That's how it's gonna go. I don't know how long, 6 months, couple of years, I don't know. But he's not last until he's 82. And this has happened before. Woodrow Wilson. This is one of my favorite stories. Woodrow Wilson spent 6 months, this is 1919, he was negotiating the Treaty of Versailles to end World War I, right? So then he's like, okay, we got to get this League of Nations going. This was the precursor to the United Nations. So he decided I'm going to go train station to train station. We're going to do a train tour all across the country. We're going to gather up support for the League of Nations. And I think he was in like Colorado maybe, and he got a splitting headache. And he powered through the speech, but then the next day his face started twitching, and it was obvious to everyone on board that he had a stroke. So this is coming up into 1920, and they canceled the whole rest of the tour, and they just booked it back to D.C. And in the middle of the night, they covered him up, and they ran him through the train station to get him to the White House. And his doctor and his chief of staff kept him in bed away from everybody. He was paralyzed on his left side. He was still president. Paralyzed on his left side, couldn't see out of one eye, couldn't keep his conversation going properly. He was kept this way for a year. No one saw him except for his wife, his doctor, and his chief of staff. Now, he pulled that off in 1920. Can that same thing be pulled off in 2021? Now, here's the key. What did the media do? There was one reporter. His name was Louis Seibold. He wrote for the New York World. This is June 18th, 1920. He wrote this article. Is the headline, correspondent, and I got to do it in 1920s voice. Correspondent in 3-hour visit finds president's mental vigor unimpaired. Executive gains 20 pounds in 2 months and does more work than before confinement. And it talks about how wonderful. Louis Seibold, he says, I was meeting with the president for over 3 hours. And we were talking about the important issues. I was watching him work with vigor. Matters of great governmental importance. With his old-time decisiveness and intellectual appraisement. And then this is my favorite line. This is some real modern-day Obama, Biden media gushing. I love this. Like Yamesh or whatever her name is, the NPR reporter, who's like, listen, Mr. President, everyone knows all these migrants are coming over because you're so kind and compassionate and wonderful and handsome. And did I say funny? So handsome. Same thing here. It was the same angular face, quite as full in cheek, and not the least bit shrunken at the temples. It was the same face registered in a mental picture 8 months before. They were unmistakably the Wilson eyes, keen, searching, snappily intelligent. So that was the article. First article written, first sighting of the president in months. So everyone read it, was like, oh, the president's okay. All of it was made up. The entire article was made up, never happened. President Wilson couldn't walk, couldn't get out of bed. His attention span was about 60 seconds. He wasn't having hours of conversation. He couldn't move. He couldn't sign anything. The interview was total fake. Never happened. Wilson's chief of staff made up all the answers. And here's the kicker. Louis Seibold, the writer of it, he won a Pulitzer Prize for that article. Like, that's the thing. I know you may be thinking, like, oh, maybe he's like a Pulitzer Prize winning writer. No. He won a Pulitzer Prize for that article. That was entirely fake. Never happened. I bring it up today because every reporter today who's covering Joe Biden is going to try to pull a Seibold. And they're going to do it. They're going to pull it off for as long as they can. And they're going to justify it by thinking they're doing some great patriotic duty, and maybe in the back of their head they'll think maybe they'll win a Pulitzer for it. Why not? It's happened before. History repeats itself, right? All right. Second story of this segment. I tell you, we got a ton to do today. The carjacking murder in D.C. Have you seen the video? This is a 66-year-old Pakistani immigrant. He's an Uber Eats driver, carjacked by a 13 and 15-year-old girl. Police say there was a taser involved. I don't see the taser in it, but police say there was a taser. Here's the video. Now, it's graphic, of course, so be aware. We're going to play a video of someone being killed. So watch this. But again, note, this is a 13 and 15-year-old girl.
No, it's in my car. Shut it! Oh my God! Somebody just stole it.
She's stealing their car.
You're stealing the car.
Yeah, we called the cops. Call the cops. Call the cops. They stole the car. These girls stole the car.
Hey, come out.
Hey, they stole the car. They stole the car. These girls.
Who else?
That's it.
Everybody's out. Everybody step back from the car.
Everybody step back from the car.
Please, my phone is in there.
No. I need you to step back from the car. Everybody, I need you to step back from the scene.
So we cut out in the middle there. Once you heard the crash, the guy with the phone, he ran to the person. So we cut that part out. And then at the end, we blurred out the man's body. Right next to the girl, like 2 feet away, is the man laying on the ground dead. I don't know if you caught it at the end. When the National Guardsmen, who are there because there's such a big threat from like MAGA extremists still at the Capitol or something like that, the National Guardsmen, they get the girls out, and one of the National Guardsmen says, let's step away, there's gas coming out of the car. And they push everyone away, and the girl says, wait, my phone is in there. She's standing 2 feet from this man's body. 2 feet. It's coming up here in a second. You'll see the man's on the left-hand side, laying on the ground. See that blurred out part there? That's where he is. The depravity of it. The depravity. I'm certain these 2 girls have no fathers at home. And I just think and I mourn for the environments that these 2 girls were living in that would lead them to do this. How callous and heartless and cold and broken must you be? I don't blame the girls as much as the people around them. I don't know what the criminal justice system does for the people around kids like this. Like, what responsibility do the adults around them have for this behavior, right? They're gonna go to juvenile for a while, right? Until they're whatever age. But what about their adults? There's no responsibility for the adults who have either abandoned them or gotten them, led them, or lack of leadership that led them to this point? Because there's not only people around them who fail, but an entire system around them that allows this culture to exist, where a 13 and a 15-year-old girl could be so heartless to a fellow human being and a fellow human life to A, try to steal someone's car in broad daylight, like what's that about? B, drive the car as he's hanging out of it and kill him. And then C, at the end of it, be worried about your cell phone. We talk a lot about our narcissistic culture. This is the next level of that. It's a very diseased culture that leads to people doing such a depraved act. And they're all over the place. I'm not picking on just this one. It happens all the time. We'll talk more about this tomorrow, once we get some more details and all that. But it's at first a family issue. No doubt about that. Second, it's a cultural issue. And then third, it's a government failure. In Washington, D.C., just this year, it's only March, there's been 95 carjackings. Now, carjacking is not Grand Theft Auto. It's not stealing a car. This is a carjacking. This is someone's in the car, and they come up and they steal it from the person driving it. There's been 95 of those in the last 3 months, and 23 juveniles have been arrested for carjacking this year. When you elect, what's that? That's crazy. When you elect DAs, which George Soros has intentionally focused his energy on, this is what we'll talk about tomorrow in more detail, about the latitude, the leniencies, the discernment. There's a better word I'm looking for. The DAs, they can do whatever they want. They choose which laws to prosecute and which not to, right? So when you elect these DAs and these mayors who allow this lawless behavior, don't be shocked when you get more lawlessness. By the way, this is how CNN framed it. CNN framed it, I don't have it in front of me. Do you guys have it? They call it, it's like an accident. They framed it as an accident. Right. It led to an accident in which he was fatally injured. No, that's not what happened. That's not what happened. When you encourage sinful behavior, don't be surprised when you get more sin and callousness and depravity. When we have a culture that doesn't value human life, don't be surprised when people rob, shoot, and murder. What'd you think was going to happen? More of that coming up tomorrow. Up next, I want to talk about the latest example, the latest experiment with universal basic income. It's coming. Started off in smaller little towns and smaller cities. This is our first big city now. It's coming nationwide. Just a matter of time, unless we stand up against it, and that's what we'll start to do next. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So the word I was looking for in the last segment was discretion. DAs have great discretion with what crimes they choose to prosecute and not. Right? And that's why George Soros has decided to put so much money into DA campaigns, because you put a ton of money into a congressman's campaign, and then what? Who cares? It's one vote out of 535. It doesn't do anything, doesn't mean anything, right? But if you could put a little bit of money into a DA's campaign, and they have a ton of power when it comes to criminal justice reform as they frame it. So DAs have a ton of discretion. We'll talk more about that one tomorrow. And then, the thing that tied those two stories together in the last segment is media providing cover fire. Media providing cover fire for Joe Biden and also for these girls who carjacked that car, but it was just a, accident. Coming up, right now, I want to talk about universal guaranteed income. They call it different things, right? In Europe, they call it a different thing. Different cities in America, they call it a different thing. Guaranteed minimum income, guaranteed basic income, universal basic income, all these different names for it. Evanston, Illinois, it's about 30 minutes outside Chicago. Like a week ago, they just started their reparations program for black families. $25,000 for home improvement or home purchase, stuff like that. And immediately, the activists said it was not enough. All right, so reparations went from like an insanely absurd idea, went from $0 in reparations to $25,000. Boom, not enough right away. And it's never going to be enough, just know that. So that was in Evanston, Illinois. But Oakland, not to be outdone, they just started their new guaranteed income program for all families of color. Whatever that really even means. $500 a month. No strings attached, they say. They did this in Stockton, California, a couple of years ago with a pilot program, and there was a study that was done, a totally non-biased study, okay? And the results came back glowing. Residents who received regular payments experienced less income volatility, on account of the free money, secured more full-time employment somehow, were better parents and partners, and even saw improvements in their health and overall well-being. See, no problems at all. No problem. Just give people free money and they're happier and they're better parents and somehow get more employment for some magical reason that makes no sense at all. No bias in that study, I'm sure. So this program, you're eligible for the free money if you have one child under 18 and you make less than $59,000 a year. So now you get another $6,000 from who knows who, taxpayer. But now, here's the key with this program. You have to be black. I don't know how black, but you gotta be black. Black enough. Why? Because white people in Oakland, on average, make 3 times as much as black households, and that's inequity and needs to be evened out. That's it. So if you're white and poor, forget it. You don't get any money. I love this. This is from CBS, that article that we just posted. I love this line. In their effort to get you to support this, they say, guaranteed income has been a goal of the Black Panther platform since its founding. Oh, good. Oh, goody. The Black Panthers are for it. The Black Panthers of the 60s were for it. Therefore, I must be now too. So you're thinking, Slater, I don't live in Oakland. Who cares? This is going to be pushed statewide in California and then nationwide. No doubt about it. Just a matter of time. It's an old idea. And this is what they do. They slowly inch this in, and then people get used to it, and very quickly, you can't live without it. You can't imagine life without it. Social Security is a good example of that. Right? They had to pitch Social Security because the expression back then was better dead than on the dole. right? I have too much pride to be on government welfare. I'm not going to accept a government welfare program. So they pitched it as an insurance program. That's why it's called SSI, Social Security Insurance, right? And now you can't touch it. No one can ever come in and say they want to reform Social Security, let alone get rid of it. My favorite example of this is the Head Start program. Head Start started in 1965. It was a 2-week catch-up summer program to get kids ready for elementary school, right? There's a couple kids who may be behind, so let's just do a couple-week kind of catch-up program over the summer and they'll be ready to go. That's how it started in 1965. Now it's $10 billion and it goes all the way down to infants. That's how it works. That's how these programs work. They start small and then grow from there. And there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program, as Milton Friedman used to say. There's an assemblyman in California. He has a bill he proposed this year. It's $1,000 a month to all low-income families in California. That would cost a cool $129 billion a year, which only a few years ago would have been double the entire budget of California. Now it's only half the budget because the budget's grown so much. And he said, listen, it's not going to pass this year, especially with Newsom being recalled. But his goal, he says, is to get people comfortable with the idea. And here's what he says: the initial shock seems to wear off. And there should be a shock. But the initial shock seems to wear off the more people are educated and realize the benefits of having more control over their lives. That's amazing. If you think the government giving you money will give you more control over your lives, how gullible can you be? All government money comes with strings attached, always. Anytime you get something for free, you're also giving something away. No such thing as a free lunch. I want to sit on that for a second. There's a million economic reasons to be against this. A million. And we'll make them all. But let me start off with the moral argument, because this is the one that's most overlooked. Work is important. Work's important. Not for the economy, obviously, but for you. Work's important. Thomas Sowell, he would argue that we've removed from the family the dad, and now we've removed the job. Just get rid of work entirely. That's how we get to the progressive utopia, right? Where work is drudgery, work is bad. We got to get away from work. Just give everyone money. No. Work is essential to meaning in life. Now, it's not the work itself necessarily. It's really the reason why you're doing the work that matters. Who are you supporting with your work? Arthur C. Brooks, he has a great book. It's called The Conservative Heart. And he said the 4 institutions of meaning, that's what he calls them, the institutions of meaning. He says there's 4 of them: faith, family, community, and meaningful work. When you take away someone's need to work, and that's where we're headed with this, that's the progressive utopia, that no one ever has to work. When you take away someone's need to work, they're just going to spiral deeper into depression and uselessness and lose their dignity, and they know it. There's a wonderful homeless charity in San Diego, and I'm sure you have one very similar to this where you live. I hope you do. It's called Solutions for Change. We're in San Diego. And their program is they take people who are homeless and they fix them up. They fix these people up. These people fix themselves up. And the most essential part of it is you wake up early and you get to work, because that's essential to building their dignity back. This is a clip of Jordan Peterson on the Dr. Oz show, of all places, and they're talking about redistribution of wealth. And Dr. Oz asks him, does redistribution of income work? And here's what he said.
Redistribution of income doesn't work.
Well, think about it this way. The guaranteed basic income idea. It's like, well, that's predicated on the idea that man lives by bread alone. Well, that isn't how it works, and I've certainly seen that in my clinical practice. I've had clients, especially addicts, if you gave them money, they would die. And the reason for that, like one guy that I remember in particular, I liked him quite a bit. He had a bad cocaine problem. And as long as he was flat broke, he wasn't dead. But as soon as he was on disability, as soon as his disability check came in, he was face down in a ditch 3 days later. So Well, and you think, well, maybe that's a consequence of his overwhelming poverty, et cetera. You could come up with some social reason for that path that he took, but it wasn't by any stretch of the imagination that simple. It's like people need purpose more than money, even.
Does man live on bread alone? We have this major problem in America, in our culture, of nihilism, lack of meaning and purpose. Just can't throw money at that. In fact, it'll make it worse. Peter Covey has a great line. He says, work does so much more than provide for our basic needs. Work draws us into the public square and instills in us a sense of personal responsibility. It allows people to feel the pride and self-respect that comes with supporting their spouses and children. So there's something to be said about a job well done, no matter what it is. But it's also why you're doing the work and who you're doing the work for. Dostoevsky said that we're not keys of a piano. Humans are not cogs in some grand economic machine. And that's how the left looks at it, looks at us. Right? That's how the left looks at people. That's how communists looked at people. Tools of the state, for the state. Everything's purpose was to glorify the state, not to glorify God, right? Like that's our main purpose, is to glorify God. We've gotten rid of God, so now our culture is about glorifying ourselves. But now we're moving past that into glorifying the state. See the difference? Martin Luther King Jr., he said, I oppose communism's political totalitarianism, because in communism, the individual ends up in subjugation to the state. In communism, man becomes hardly more than a depersonalized cog in the turning wheel of the state. A depersonalized cog in the turning wheel of the state. This is so important because the people today who are pushing universal basic income, they couch it as you being able to live your full self. They pitch it as you achieving full happiness and pat themselves on the back for helping their fellow man. But it actually destroys souls in the process. That's the true story. Coming up next, the Georgia voting bill. Can you really not drink water when standing in line? No, it's all a lie. We'll tell you the true story about it next. Spread the word.
What I'm worried about is how un-American this whole initiative is. It's sick. It's sick. Deciding in some states that you cannot bring water to people standing in line, waiting to vote. The Republican voters I know find this despicable. Republican voters. The folks outside this White House. I'm not talking about the elected officials. I'm talking about voters. And so I'm convinced that we'll be able to stop this because it is the most pernicious thing. This makes Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle.
First of all, that's a ridiculous line. Most pernicious, it's sick. That is an absolute lie, what he just said about people can't bring you water. There's a total, absolute lie. The law has a bunch of things in it. It's SB 202 in Georgia. That line specifically says there can be no electioneering. It just says someone can't come up to you with water that has like a Joe Biden label on the outside of it or a Donald Trump label. It's a no electioneering law, which every single state has. That is an absolute lie, and he knows it. Bob Barr is here. He's a former congressman in Georgia to talk about SB 202. Congressman, how are you, sir?
Well, I'm doing good. I'm doing better than Joe Biden, obviously, because I can string a couple of sentences together without looking at notes.
Do you have any notes in front of you? Talking points you need to share with us here? Or are you going to do it all on the top of your old dome piece instead?
No notes, nothing.
So am I correct in saying that what Joe Biden said is a total lie, and he knows it?
I don't know what he knows and what he doesn't know. This is the real problem with the president of the United States. Either he knows that what he says is a lie, and he says it anyway, or he really is clueless and he is simply reading talking points or notes that his staff have put in front of him. Either way, it illustrates just how out of touch and in how out of place he is as president of the United States. This is a very dangerous situation, aside from the comedy of having a president that appears to have no idea what he's doing.
Let me just, to put the water part to rest, this is what the law specifically says, among other things. No person shall solicit votes or distribute or display any campaign material, electioneering, nor shall any person give, offer to give, or participate in the giving of any money or gifts, including but not limited to food and drink to a voter. This code shall not be construed to prohibit a poll officer from making available self-service water from an unattended receptacle to a voter waiting in line to vote. So people can drink water. You can bring your own water. Poll officials can give you water. They can have self-service water stations. No one's gonna be dying while waiting in line. They just can't, again, it can't electioneer. A Biden rep can't come and give people water in line. That's all this is. I'm so annoyed at that, and that people fall for it, and that the media falls for it as well. Anyway, Bob, what else does this bill do that is noteworthy and good?
Well, what it does is it brings at least a little bit of strength back to voting procedures in Georgia that had been loosened to the point of allowing all manner of potential corruption by the Secretary of State in the elections last November and in January. It, for example, simply now requires that in order for a voter to obtain an absentee ballot, which means they don't vote in person on election day at a polling place, that they have to show, surprise, an ID. And yet, if you believe here again what the Democrats in Georgia are claiming and what the president is claiming, this is nothing but a raw, racist voter suppression effort to simply require that in order for us to make sure that your vote is not nullified by somebody's vote who is not even registered to vote, you simply have to show an ID. That is at the heart of what they are claiming is a voter suppression provision. And there are others. It didn't go far enough, in my view. Last year, the Secretary of State in Georgia improperly, and I believe illegally, opened the floodgates to massive absentee balloting, even for any number of people that didn't even ask for them. It does tighten that up a little bit, but there are some provisions that I would have liked to have seen in the bill that Republicans, typical as they often do, they would rather settle than fight. So they left a number of provisions out.
Yeah, Joy Reid on MSNBC called it, again, the new Jim Crow, Jim Crow 2.0. That's the talking point from the left. And in reality, one of the things that this law does as well is it looks at the last general election, and if there's any voting sites that lines were longer than an hour, the state takes authority and either adds more poll workers, more voting machines, or more precincts, more places to vote. So it decreases lines, and it's being pitched as a torturous assault on black voters in Georgia. Like, that is so brazen. What's going on?
These are arguments that neither you nor I nor any reasonable person could make with a straight face. Because, one, they are just absolute lies and mischaracterization of the provisions in the bill, but they do exactly what the left wants to have happen, and that is to make voting easier. This simply takes out of the hands, to a limited extent, the maintenance of polling places in which they are so inefficient or there are too many people so that people have to wait in line. It allows sort of a safety valve so that additional polling sites, additional mechanisms can be set up. One would have thought that if the left was really meaning what it said, they would applaud the Republican legislature in Georgia for passing this. But of course they don't, because it's not about making voting easier. It's about making sure that the maximum number of voters that they want are, in fact, gotten into the system, however that may happen.
Yep. It's not Republican precincts that are preventing black people from voting either. These are in Democrat stronghold areas where the votes are so long. And how offensive to tell black voters that they're incapable of getting an ID. I believe this bill makes it free to get an ID, doesn't it?
Sure it does. And this has been the law in Georgia for many, many years. Years ago, when the notion of actually having a government-issued ID in order to be able to vote, to register to vote, the same argument was raised. Oh, there are millions of people in Georgia that can't afford an ID. No, you can get a government-issued ID at no expense to you. Of course, their next argument is, well, people who need that ID that don't have it, they don't have transportation to the government office where you can actually get an ID. So the bottom line here is nothing is going to satisfy them. Whatever Republicans do to strengthen the voting procedures or actually to make them easier and more efficient are going to be criticized by Stacey Abrams and the other Democrat crowd.
My last question for you, Congressman, is how should we, I'm way in California, so we got our own problems here, but I'm looking at Georgia and, we see the results of the Senate election, whatever. How should one look at the state of the Republican Party in Georgia right now? State level, like state reps, state Senate, state party. How should we be characterizing them?
With a great deal of concern. Again, I mentioned a little bit ago that among many Georgians, not the governor, but among many elected Georgians here in public office, they are intimidated by challenges or charges of voter suppression or racial insensitivity, and they have a tendency to back down when challenged. And of course, the left, this is what they do best. They love to get into these fights and intimidate Republicans, and often they are able to do that at the national level and here in Georgia. We have an election coming up next year for governor and a number of other statewide offices. I feel fairly confident that the Secretary of State, a Republican who opened these floodgates to voting procedures that were very problematic, will be defeated. No guarantee, but I feel pretty confident he'll be defeated. We do have, there will be challenges to Governor Kemp, who was blamed by President Trump totally improperly for what the Secretary of State did. So that's going to be a real important race. But Stacey Abrams is out there claiming that she still won the gubernatorial election 2.5 years ago and making plans very likely to run again. Then we'll have a Senate race coming up, and these same charges of racial divisiveness and voter suppression are going to be leveled at whoever the Republicans put up to run against Senator Warner. So we're going to have some real battles on our hand, and I do worry that there are still an awful lot of Republicans that are too timid to really stand up to the Democrat attacks that we know are coming.
You're not. Former Congressman Bob Barr, I hope you can be one of our Georgia correspondents. I hate that Georgia's a battleground state. What in the world happened? But we'll definitely talk again. Thanks, Congressman.
Always a pleasure.
Appreciate you, sir. Let's come back, talk to our professor about latest with COVID and masks and vaccines and all that stuff. Coming up next, True Story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Slater Crusaders, he gets me out of bed on a Monday morning. I can't wait to talk to Professor Vincent Racaniello. He's the professor of virology at Columbia University and host of Microbe.tv, all about viruses, and he's been doing it for years, even before COVID came around. Professor, there's all these COVID-related podcasts. And it's like, please.
Yeah, we've been around
in the game
way before, yeah. Come to us.
And you're not going in. And even after, you're not going away anyway. So California, you saw starting Friday, everyone over 50 can get a vaccine. And then what I wanted to ask you about is 2 weeks after that, April 15th, everyone over the age of 16. 16 seemed young. I would have assumed it was 18. Why the 16 marker?
16 to 18 was the age of some of the participants in at least one of the trials. I think Pfizer had some 16 to 18-year-olds. And, in them, even though the numbers, not a lot of people were tested, it was safe, no side effects and so forth. So I think the FDA initially said, no, we're not going to authorize it for 16 and up, just 18 and up. But now they've probably reconsidered, and we need to get the vaccine in as many people as possible. So hence 16 and up. But of course, what I'd love to see is 16 below, which we are not at yet.
When are we going to get the numbers on that?
Well, some of the trials are ongoing in younger than 16-year-olds. So my feeling is in the next couple of months, I'm hoping by the summer we can start immunizing a lot of younger kids just in time for the school in the fall.
From a virologist perspective, what would be different with a vaccine in a 19-year-old versus a 12-year-old? Like, what's different about the human body where the vaccine may or may not work?
It's really just a matter of testing it because 18 and up, you can consent to be a participant in a clinical trial instead of, if you're less than 18, you need to have parental consent. It just adds a level of complexity. There's really no reason scientifically or biologically why younger kids should be excluded from these trials from the start. And I think this pandemic may end up changing the way we do these trials and have kids enrolled in them initially anyway.
We my wife and I had a date night on Saturday, went out to dinner, and we go to it's the same restaurant we always go to lately, actually during the whole COVID thing. And for the first time ever, we were the youngest people there. Usually it's all young people. This time they were all old people because everyone there was vaccinated now. So it was everyone out there to celebrate going out. It was cute to see. What's your policy suggestion with people who have been vaccinated and wearing masks? Because my concern is that if you get vaccinated, you still have to wear a mask. That's like one less reason to maybe get a vaccination if you still have to do all the stuff. So what's your take on that?
Well, if you are hanging out with people who have been vaccinated, then you don't have to wear a mask. You can have in-home gatherings, right, with people who are vaccinated and not wear a mask. The reason we're telling people to wear a mask even after vaccination is we want to make sure that you're still not going to shed enough virus to transmit to someone else should you happen to be infected. You're going to be protected from getting sick. You're going to be protected from going in the hospital, but you may shed a bit of virus that could infect someone else. I think the chance of that happening is pretty low at this point. So we're just, erring on the side of caution. We just don't want to infect people accidentally. And that's why if you're in a place where there are people who are not vaccinated, for now, just wear a mask until maybe another month or two.
Fauci mentioned that he thinks herd immunity is between 70 and 85%. You the other day were telling us between 50 and 75, something like that. Why so much discretion? Why so much difference between what we think it is?
The way you figure out this number is you look at how transmissible the virus is. And, that number for SARS-CoV-2 was figured out at the very beginning of the outbreak last year, and it was 2 to 3. In other words, if you're infected, on average, you're going to infect 2 to 3 other people. And you use that to figure out the percent you need for herd immunity. So if I take 2 to 3, that's where I get 50 to 70%. I think what Dr. Fauci is doing is taking the transmission numbers from some of these variants, which people have suggested might have higher transmission, but I don't really buy that. I think it's still 2 to 3. I differ with Dr. Fauci. I have great respect for Dr. Fauci, but I think it's more like 50 to 70%.
Headline: Professor Racaniello throws Fauci under bus, calls for resignation. That's what I just heard. Study here that says pregnant women vaccinated may pass on antibodies to infants. That would be good news, right?
That's very good news. You can pass antibodies, through the placenta or even after birth in breast milk, right? Someone asked me the other day, is it okay to breastfeed a baby, after being vaccinated? Yeah, that's a good way that mothers protect their babies, but baby when born can't really make its own antibodies yet. So depends on the mother for that. So it's all good for sure.
We got 1 minute. It's all yours, Professor. What else do we need to know?
So I think a lot of people are worried about the AstraZeneca vaccine, probably not here in the U.S. because it's not being used here, but you've heard stories of blood disorders after immunization. I would say probably it's not a worry. These numbers are pretty low, and some countries are just being cautious. But if you have a chance to get an AstraZeneca vaccine, I would say it's still the benefits are going to outweigh any risks of that. And, we see the outbreak plateauing right now. It's not going down as far as we want. And that's, again, because there are pockets of unvaccinated people. They're getting together. They're transmitting. So I would say, please try and hold out another month or so. And more and more people vaccinated, it's just going to get better.
If you had a choice between any of the vaccines, which one would you take? Obviously, the answer is whichever one in line, whichever one you can get. But pretty soon we're going to really have an option. So what would you pick?
If I could choose any one, I would say spin them around in the wheel, and I'll take the one that lands up in front of me.
Is that right? Yeah.
I think they're all fine.
That little of a difference between them.
Yeah. I think they're all really good.
That's amazing. Yeah, really good. Professor, wonderful to talk to you, sir. Microbe.tv. Everyone go watch the Professor's podcast. We'll talk to you next week, sir. And that's it. We got to go. True story. Mike Slater. See you tomorrow. Spread the word.